most interesting things about women in business and addressing the gender pay gap is one of those larger questions that businesses and society must begin to address is the idea of stereotypes. There's a recent article from The Economist called Women and Economics. Economics is uncovering its gender problem, and it's one of many articles that we will have seen in this publication alone over the past few years since the Me Too movement and the hashtag Time's Up movement have really not only empowered more women to speak out about sexual harassment at the workplace, but have also empowered more of people in the broader society to see the inequalities that women face at work, and certainly that is the gender pay gap. So many of these articles will look at sector by sector. What are airlines doing? What are businesses and different areas doing? And this one simply looks at economics. So I don't want economics to be put upon by this, but it is something that I'm quite interested in because certainly I am an academic. I teach at a university. I've studied at many different universities, and I'm very much fascinated at differences in gender across departments. Economics, as the article says, recruits too few women in the profession. They are treated unfairly and that their talents are not fully realized. That's in the first paragraph. So in the second paragraph, they give a little bit of a statistical basis for their argument. It says that in the US, women make up only 1 in 7 full professors and 1 in 3 doctoral candidates. I'm an American. I am living in the UK. I think those stats are not so different here in the UK. Now, it goes on to say, so basically they're saying that women are absent from academia, and remember, it's academia where people produce books about economics. They teach former economists and future business people, but also economics, as the article goes on to say, is very determinate about what businesses do in general. There's another article I'll just refer to about that because economics is not just any department within a university or a business school per se. Satisfied with the profession. 20% of women who answered this survey are satisfied compared with 40% of men. And they talk about, being unfairly treated and feeling, again, as the introduction said, that their potential is not fully realized. What's interesting about this is that the article goes on to conclude that the evidence suggests that economics should do what economics does in order to remedy this problem, and that is to crunch data and its capacity to experiment. Take data, study the problem. So, for example, the gender pay gap. In the UK, the government has dictated that every company over a certain size, I believe it's 200 to 250 people, must do an audit of its gender pay. And there's some really good definitions for anyone who is still confused about, equal pay for equal work and blah, blah, blah. Go to the website from the UK. Just Google, gender pay gap UK, and the website is extremely accessible and extremely informative because, again, it's not just economics, but as this article is saying, those tools can help us undo some of this. So, here's the thing. In this particular industry, this is what they say is going on. There is some evidence, for example, that women are held to higher standards than men in peer reviews and that they are given less credit for their co-writing than men. What does this mean? Held to higher standards than men in peer reviews, because peer reviews are really a big area where we find both potential mentors and mentees, where we find areas for promotion, where we find the opportunity to negotiate our salaries, importantly. And so there's a stereotype that women face that men don't, and it is as age-old as psychoanalysis itself, and it is the mother whore. This is a good representation of the mother whore dichotomy. This is, of course, the songbird, Ella Fitzgerald, and the pinup of all times, Marilyn Monroe. Now, for many people, if you walk into your workspace, you'll see both men and women upholding a Marilyn Monroe ideal, typical standard of beauty, complete with bleaching and all that sort of thing. Now, what's interesting about that is that if you look at studies on peer reviews, it reflects this mother-whore dichotomy, that women who are beautiful are considered nice, accessible, pretty, not very intelligent, dumb blonde. And they're likable at work. Women who are smart and or less conventionally, traditionally pretty are less likable, i.e., less cooperative on teams, but they can be intelligent. Now, for men, our intelligence does not compromise our good looks. Our good looks don't compromise our intelligence. As a matter of fact, one may enhance the other. But that stereotype for women of the dumb blonde is so powerful that it's reflected in peer reviews, and we have to accept that we too hold stereotypes. I want to just dig a bit deeper and look at a different stereotype. I'd like to bring into this issue of race, because racial stereotypes also layer in the workplace. I have many Black women students who come to me and ask me specifically, for example, how do I do my hair for this interview or this video or this picture that I have to send in for this really important opportunity that I want, knowing that I'm expected to be both pretty, but I'm also expected as a Black person to be non-threatening and able to agree to assimilate to that culture to whatever degree. And they struggle with it. Do we have to assimilate is what they're ultimately asking. And it's what many people will ask across any of these social lines. And I want to shift to race because there are some interesting ways that they interplay. Here's Michelle Obama in 2008, depicted giving a knuckle bump with the Angela Davis afro, specific to, again, her Black body, to say that they are anti-white. President Obama, or president candidate at the time, went to Kenya and he dressed in local garb, and so they're trying to depict him as a Muslim, and of course the implicit assumption is that Islam is evil for these people, and so they pander to those stereotypes in order to garner votes. So when we talk about stereotypes in the workplace, these people are at work. Okay, this is one of the teaching tools that I use, and this is a really interesting one about the stereotypical beautiful housewife who resists using her power in the 60s show Bewitched so that she can be a housewife to this mortal, normal human. And so she does everything to just appear and be just a normal housewife. Of course, it's a 22-minute comedy show, and so she has to, of course, use her powers to help him and save the day. And it's wonderful, and everything is marital bliss at the end. But of course, we know that in the show, she always helps him to do something wonderful in his job, and they become, they maintain their class standing. And so ultimately, the show was really retro and progressive in many ways, but using those stereotypes to challenge what we think women should be was that line at the time. Again, in the 90s, when Matt TV did a parody of this, again, challenging gender and race, when the character who parodies this original sitcom is in one of those, meetings at home where her husband has brought home some clients at the end of the day and says, hey, honey, you have to create a meal and atmosphere for us so we can do business. She, instead of using her witchcraft to help the dinner go flawlessly or come up with a great idea that will please the client, she uses her witchcraft and she becomes a Black woman, and she engages in those stereotypes, those sapphire stereotypes, to give him attitude and assert herself as a woman. It's interesting that as a comedy they can pander to both the gender and the race and the times, because again, it looks ridiculous that a woman would sacrifice herself in such a way just to be a normal standard housewife. So the show in its reboots will look different. We'll talk about in the future, but it is all to say that the dominant stereotypes that we grew up with, that we're socialized in through the media culture, and this is why Up there I have Noam Chomsky, who talks about manufacturing consent. Well, media, its role, according to that propaganda model, is to inculcate us into society. Now, we carry those stereotypes into the workplace, and so now we have to do some implicit bias work on getting them out. But first and foremost, as all of these articles point out, including the one from The Economist about economics, that interestingly suggests that one of the things we have to do is be true to our core principles, and that's look at ourselves, take an honest audit of our ideologies, and question how we yield power around us, and are we reflective of the patriarchal norms that we undoubtedly were socialized around. So, happy reading.